Thank you.
Yes. Hi, I'm Phil Manser from Indiana University. I have a question for Jessica. You said that you remove inauthentic accounts. Do you do anything similar to that for pages? Because pages, anybody can create a page and anybody can be behind it, and we find that they're used to spread a lot of misinformation. You talked about content, but not the actual pages themselves. And if you and related to that, is there any plan to make data from pages easily available for research, for example, through an API, so that people could study how pages are used to spread various kinds of misinformation?
That's a great question. Can folks hear me? Okay, perfect. Great question. So the answer to the first part of the question is yes. So when pages have admins or administrators, when we find that those accounts are false, the page will then come down. So we look at the accounts behind the page. In terms of making data available, as I mentioned, we're always looking for ways to be more transparent about our efforts and ways that we can, make more information available to support those kinds of efforts. So it's kind of something that's ongoing and we're continuing to think about.
Other questions? Over there.
Hi, I'm Joe Sparks. I'm a freelancer. My question is, do you have any real-time tools to do this, and how fast does it happen? Because I would assume the faster you can quash something, the less effective it would be. So can any of the first three speakers please comment on that?
Okay, is this on? Yeah, so speed is not something academics are known for, unfortunately. I got the NBC data set dropped on Valentine's Day of this year, and I managed to get an analysis out about 6 weeks later, which is like light speed in like academic terms. And so I think that, the trade-off is always, speed and quality, right? So the faster you do something, the less quality there's going to be to it. Now, I would direct you to, there is an ongoing project that's I'm spacing on the name, but probably people in the room know what it is. But it's funded by the German Marshall Fund, and they're trying to track a number of Russian disinformation agents. The issue is they won't tell you who they are because the analysis basically assumes that if we tell you who they are, if they tell us who they are, then that sort of causes them to scatter and do all these sorts of things. And so I really, it's called the something project. I can't remember what it is, but somebody know what I'm talking about? This thing is. Yeah, it's called Hamilton 68. Thank you so much. And so they are trying this sort of real-time thing, but there are some limitations, chief among them, that they can't tell you who the actual accounts are. So.
Next question. Over there, in the back.
Hi, my name is Justin Littman. I have to hold my computer. My name is Justin Littman with George Washington University. The tweets in the NBC data set that Dean referenced were provided to NBC by anonymous sources. While there may be other reasons, one of the reasons that the sources were anonymous is because sharing the tweets violates Twitter's policies. Similarly, Facebook has created a public database of political ads. However, that database is designed for individual queries rather than large-scale studies. So my question is, what obligation do social media platforms have to support the study of disinformation, whether it be through their policies or through the infrastructure they support for transparency?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to give you my opinion. I think that they absolutely are obligated. I think that, when you're studying something that has as much acknowledged as importance as disinformation and misinformation do, not only by people in this room, but also by people who are very high up in the U.S. government. I've advanced what I call a public interest rationale, right, in violating some social media companies' terms of service to be able to study this content. If you consider the alternative of not doing so and not understanding what's going to happen, right, when you've got the Director of National Intelligence telling us the IRA is at it again, right? I think that I'm willing. I mean, I have tenure, right? So I'm willing to take the hit on that. You know what I mean? So I'm okay with that, and I'm okay saying it publicly. And I think more people should do so, honestly.
And from the Facebook perspective, as I mentioned, we are always looking at ways that we can be more transparent. And I know on the misinformation side, for example, we're partnering with a commission to study misinformation and the role in elections, and partnering very closely with academics and sharing data for that purpose. And so I think we're making progress in this area. And it's always a balance, and we're trying to strike the right balance.
Can I just add something to that? Is it on? Yeah. I mean, just building on those points, if I look at the work that we're trying to do, I know that Facebook has rolled out the fact-checking to videos and images, and when I was looking at the detail, they announced this a couple of months ago. This is now being rolled out in 4 different countries. And of course, as an academic, that's exactly the data that we would love to get access to in terms of the next phase of the research that we're doing around images. And so where maybe there are natural, logical next steps in terms of what have we been able to find out from the data that we've sort of painstakingly put together. So this is data that we're using that is essentially the end result of 2 other projects where the data wasn't used further. But that's only 95 image case studies that we have. That's a really, really small database. If we could get access to a much larger database to actually see what is happening, and I know that that would only be on one platform, but these are the difficulties. And so yes, I know that there are different academic partnerships happening. Twitter's had the data grants and then they didn't have them. But I think this is where research really is hampered, where there is a will and a desire and, kind of backing on to what Dean was saying, academics willing to, not necessarily risk careers, but to do things kind of for the public good. And if that's hampered, then I don't know anybody else who is so obsessed with trying to understand images when it comes to mis and disinformation than the group of researchers that we've got in the lab. But I think these things really, really matter. So I do hope that these kinds of initiatives, partnering with academics, are there for those right reasons and not for kind of PR purposes because a company is on the back foot, understandably. But I just really want to just absolutely stress that I hope that those partnerships then are sustainable, that they also embrace the stuff that isn't necessarily in the best interest of the company in terms of findings, because this is where I fear these kinds of partnerships then won't necessarily see the light of day in terms of the results. So it's just a public plea, really, to say when we try and work together, let's try and do that really for the right reasons and as publicly and transparently and openly as possible, because I think there is a lot at stake.
Next question, back there. Go ahead.
Roman, GDIT. I had 2 questions. The first is for Farida. It's pretty trivial. In any of the 95 images that you studied, did you find any evidence of steganography? And the second question is for Jessica, and that is, through the process of the identify, review, remove, have you found that had any kind of appreciable impact on user engagement with that content?
So do you mean things that were hiding in plain sight? What?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you elaborate a little bit? What kinds of things are you thinking about?
So a typical example of steganography would be embedding information regarding command and control infrastructure that would typically be used for malware.
I think you need to elaborate a little bit more again.
We might take this conversation
Sure.
offline.
Not that I can think of off the top of my mind where we have been conscious that that is what's happening. I think what we have found, as I've spoken about, is where you find out what the message was much later. So in terms of what can you do in real time, or the kind of the time element, I think these are the kinds of things or the kinds of input that we would value tremendously, and potentially work with other people like yourself if there is that level of expertise out there that can bring another layer of analysis to the data because we don't necessarily have that expertise, right? And I think this is why images are so incredibly tricky. So we have worked and we are working with people who have an expertise in meme research, for example. There's issues around intergenerational reading of images, right? So a lot of memes are based on Friends or The Matrix. I show this to my students and they're like, who's Morpheus? I have no idea what's going on here. So there are enormous issues with the reading of visual material. And if you add this layer of complexity to it as well, then I think we also, need to be better at recognizing the limitations of the knowledge that we have when we come to analyzing these kinds of data sets. And then if there are additional communities that have that knowledge, to look again at those images, maybe we will find another layer that's also been hidden from us. So I think it's a really good point, and I think it's definitely something that we should look into, and it's not something that pops out as, yes, we have, clear-cut examples of that. So thank you very much for your feedback.
On your second question, so I think I'd mentioned earlier that we do see if an article is rated false by our fact checkers, we do see engagement with that article decrease substantially. So we reduce future views by 80%. Another item that was interesting for me before I took over the portfolio, we had been marking articles that were rated false by fact checkers with a disputed flag. So something that would, like a clearly visible sort of ticker that would show people that the article had been fact checked and marked false. And we actually had research showing that users ended up engaging more with that content. In fact, it was more deeply entrenching their feelings about the content. And so we ended up, as I said, our policies are changing. We're always iterating. That's when we transitioned to related articles, because we found that showing more context to people is actually more effective than simply, tagging an article as potentially false or misleading.
We have time for one or two more questions before breaking for lunch. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Jevin West from University of Washington, and just back to Jessica, that 80% number that you mentioned, I think it's a great number to talk about. But from our work we've done, we find it's really hard to establish a counterfactual compared to 80% to what you would expect given the same number of counts, number of shares. I'm hearing these numbers a lot, not just from Facebook but others, that we're seeing these big drops. But compared to what can we use as our established baseline, and is there a way that we could have sort of a common language so that when we hear those numbers we can better understand what improvement really is occurring?
That's a fair question, and my understanding is it's compared to I suppose it's future views. I don't actually, the answer is unfortunately I don't know. These are numbers that we run through our data scientists, so I'll have to get back to you in terms of methodology, but it's a fair point and totally understood that the numbers, explaining the rationale behind them would be helpful.
Last question. Go ahead.
Miles Smith from Internews. It strikes me that the previous conversation with the official from the Department of Justice mentioned that the U.S. policy response to this is based on transparency and a pitiless public. Yet, what we're also hearing from Facebook is that we should trust Facebook to change its algorithm itself within its own company to improve the sort of quality of information on its platform. It seems like those two things are incongruent. The expectation for transparency from the government side with the expectation from Facebook that they'd be able to handle it internally. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
I don't think it's incongruent, actually. I think that Facebook, although we have been developing and imposing our own sort of policies to address this issue, I think transparency is a goal. It's something we are striving towards, both in terms of making data public, making our approach public, making the changes that we make public as well. And so I actually think that the two approaches are complementary.
I think we had one more back in the corner. One more.
Thank you. Elias Grohl, I write for Foreign Policy Magazine. Jessica, I wanted to follow up with you on the question of transparency and data, piggybacking what Renee was talking about this morning. One of the key pieces of data that Facebook is sitting on that it hasn't released is the engagement data on the IRA campaign. I'm wondering, that is in the 2016 election, I'm wondering if you can elaborate on why Facebook hasn't released that data and whether there's any conversations within the company to make a more public accounting of what that data looks like to perhaps be able to measure what the impact of that campaign looked like.
I unfortunately don't know the answer to that question. I'm on the misinformation policy team, focusing on things like our third-party fact-checking program, and so there are teams dedicated more to our information operations work, and they perhaps would be better situated to answer. So I'm happy to follow up with you after and get your card and have someone follow up with you on that.
I actually do know the answer to this question. So Facebook is cooperating with an initiative called Social Science One, in which they're making a number of data collections available to researchers to study. One of those is a set of URLs that have been posted. I think the floor is has to have been posted at least 20 times, and they're doing that over the past couple of years, and they're going to make that available to data scientists to analyze, and presumably any IRA related URL that was posted at least 20 times will be part of that data set, and that includes things like engagement, some aggregate demographics of people who shared it, and that sort of thing. So conceivably, if there were projects that were directed specifically at the IRA and looking at the URLs that they shared, you'd be able to get at least some of it through that.
And with that, please join me in thanking our tremendous second phase of lightning speakers. Really fantastic. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. That was really good. So we're going to break for lunch now.